And let's speak now with Dr. Alexey Muraviev. He's an associate professor of national security and strategic studies at Curtin University, and he's joining us this morning from Perth. Dr. Muraviev, firstly, I want to get your reaction to what came out of the G7 meeting. Just how big a win is the security pact with the U.S. for Kyiv, and what sort of impact do you think it will have on the ongoing war?
Well, I'm not really sure about the practicalities of it because Ukraine already enjoys a lot of special connections with the United States. And to me, it's an attempt by the Biden administration to some sort of establish an ongoing framework in case there's going to be change of guard in the White House as a result of the forthcoming presidential elections, and to ensure that whatever Donald Trump is saying, and also in terms of raising fears that if he would come out victorious in the presidential race, it may dramatically reverse U.S. stand on ongoing military support for Ukraine. So I think it's an attempt by the Biden administration to demonstrate, regardless of what's going to happen in November, the strategic course of Washington will remain unchanged. And that is also a signal to the European nations that they need to continue to fund this campaign, because fundamentally the United States are more preoccupied with what's happening in our part of the woods, which is in the Pacific, rather than they want to be forever committed or engaged in this conflict in Eastern Europe.
Professor, I want to ask you about that $50 billion loan that's going to be funded by interest earned from seized Russian assets. It took a long time. Can I ask you about why Europe has been hesitant, first of all, about using these assets compared to the US, for example? And do you see it also, changing the course of the war at all?
Well, to answer the later part of your question, I don't really see it's going to make a dramatic change because this is a very costly war, and the loan will not just be designed to cover the war expenses. Ukraine is now entirely dependent on Western economic support. The country has 100% deficit, and to run the government, to run the state sector, to pay people's wages, to also engage in some immediate reconstruction, for example, collateral damage that the Russians inflicted to the Ukrainian energy grid, all costs a lot of money. So that's where the money would go. It also highlights to me that Europe is running out of money and there are no more generous spending fund and spending expense. And that's why it's been decided to start tapping into the Russian part of funds. And to answer the first part of your question, why there was a hesitancy? Well, look, I mean, it creates a precedent because it's going to be probably one of the first cases when somebody else's frozen sovereign assets would be used without effectively explicit permission of the owner on the grounds, obviously, of that sovereign violating international law. But it has the potential of undermining the confidence of other investors in Western financial institutions, and to me that was one of the driving factors behind this ongoing hesitancy to tap into the resources. Also, because there was no real established framework that would legitimize such use in the past.
Professor, a very quick one about the latest sanctions announced by the U.S., the Moscow exchange halting dollar and euro trading. Quick question here: is it going to be effective, or will Moscow again find ways to evade them the same way it has done so with previous rounds of sanctions?
Well, the Russians claim that they were ready for it. It certainly triggered a round of speculation when the Russians rushed to buy currency at exchange points. It would very much depend on how the government would continue to regulate this. But given the fact that the Russians survived this tsunami of sanctions in the past, I can possibly assume that it's not going to be a massive, dramatic turnaround for Moscow this time.
And Doctor, let's talk about the peace summit that's going to be taking place in Switzerland this weekend. With Moscow's notable absence from the summit, What sort of practical outcomes can we realistically expect from it?
Well, I cannot really see any practical outcomes. I mean, the Russians claim they haven't been invited to the summit. They have been excluded to the summit. That's why they're not attending it. Everyone has its own, obviously, version of why Moscow is not there. I don't think Ukraine was interested in having Russia at the table. I think Ukraine's plan was to have some sort of a unified agreement, then to be tabled to the Russians as a form of condition. I think there would be several questions that need to be addressed whilst assessing the impact of this summit. First of all, representation by the heads of state. And there is still a question whether US President Joe Biden will attend the summit, because currently he is in Italy, but for now it's his Vice President Harris that has committed to attend the summit. That obviously downplays the seniority, because the United States was heavily lobbying that initiative of Volodymyr Zelensky. Other states, whilst formally attending, they are not sending their senior leaders or key brokers to the summit. For example, Australia or New Zealand, they're not sending foreign minister, let alone prime minister, to the summit. So that sort of also lowers the level of potential impact that the summit was supposed to generate. The final point is the outcome, and already some drafts of proposed declaration has been leaked to the press. And what's significantly missing from those leaks is the question that Russia needs to remove its forces from occupied territories, that Ukraine can claim back its territory to the boundaries of 1991. And again, if we believe what's being published in the press, and that's pure speculation at this point, the whole resolution may be limited to humanitarian aspects, to the return of children question, and question concerning radiation security. And if that's going to be the case, then it's going to be a wasted shot on so many fronts, given the publicity, given the enormous diplomatic effort that went behind the creation and the push for the summit. And finally, the key point is the fundamental position of the Global South. And I think the Global South is either voting with its feet by not attending it, or going to be there in rather passive than active role.
All right, Professor, we do have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Dr. Alexey Muraviev is from Curtin University.